we're going to focus on just a couple of topics for this hour. And I think many of you, because you listen regularly, are aware that we have, I think we could safely call it, a planned invasion going on, really of the Western world. And you don't see the Islamic community trying to, well, immigrate to Paraguay or even Cuba. No, they're trying to immigrate into the Western world that is heavily Christian. At least parts of Europe at one time was heavily Christian, not so much today. Of course, America, Canada. And part of the goal, the planned invasion, is to extinguish Christianity. We'll talk about that and much more. Michelle Bachman back in studio with me again. Thanks for coming back again, Michelle.
Always a joy. Thanks so much. I look forward to this hour.
Because you and I, we live here in the Twin City area. However, I've got listeners living in parts of the country where they have no experience with this. They have no clue that there is a kind of an invasion going, because it hasn't hit their neighborhood yet. Now, I'm sure it will eventually, but so far it has not hit their neighborhood. And I think we need to explain that this is a part of a plan. It's actually a name to it, but it's a part of the plan to expand the caliphate. I think a lot of people think the caliphate, well, isn't that limited maybe to parts of the Middle East, Iraq and Syria, etc.? Really, no. It's a global caliphate that Islamic world is hoping for.
Right. The first of the 5 pillars of Islam is jihad. The second one is a concept called hijra, and that's about settlement. That's how Muhammad told his fathers to conquer the world for Islam and to establish an Islamic government. And so the settlement is very intentional, and we have seen tremendous numbers come into the United States and demanding that Islam be continued. You had a sound clip that you played a little bit earlier, and what you heard were a lot of pejorative terms being hurled at our president of the United States. Why is that? Because our president is trying to promote the United States of America as a strong country. He continually will reference God and the importance of lifting up God in the United States and Bible reading, etc. And that is not the goal of this mass migration. And again, this is the largest untold story of our time. I wish the media would cover it, but it's not being covered. That's why you are covering it here on your Cutting Edge show, because mass migration of the Islamic world into the Christianized West for the purpose of extinguishing Christianity, that is the story.
Obviously, Europe is in the process of committing suicide.
That's right.
It's very tragic.
Cultural suicide.
Cultural
and
suicide.
President Trump alluded to that in his Warsaw speech.
And Europe 60 years ago, certainly 100 years ago, was heavily Christian, and they kind of consciously decided to throw God out. 50 to 60 years, there are terrible consequences when you throw God out of anything, out of a school, out of a state, out of a ministry, out of a continent, and they did that some 50 years ago. As a result, they could be almost 100% Muslim in another 30 to 50 years.
Well, it has changed so much that today, as you and I are in this show, I think it's hard for people to believe, but it's true. If you look at London, the capital of Britain, the minority now are traditional Brits that lived in London. They're minority. The majority now is the third world, people from third world nations, primarily from Islamic nations. That's in Britain. There have been experts who have said that within our lifetime, Jan, and again, we are not at the beginning of our lives, we're well beyond the halfway mark. In the course of our lifetime, what experts are saying is that Europe will be dominated by Islam. It will no longer be European. Sweden will no longer be Swedes.
Right.
They will be a minority in their own country.
All right, so when Donald Trump was in Europe recently, and he asked if the West had the will to survive,
Yes.
what did he mean?
That's the ultimate question. He asked the exact right question, because what we need to know is, what is it that America was found on? What was the West found on? The pillar and cornerstone, if you will, of Western civilization is Jesus Christ and the gospel of Jesus Christ. It is the Bible. Those values created unparalleled societies never seen before in terms of what was created for symphonies, for plays, for works of literature, works of art, for wealth creation, for freedoms, for rights among women, among children. We've never seen this level of prosperity before, ever in 5,000 years of recorded human history. And so what President Trump asked in Poland, he was pointing to Poland as a positive example that pushed back against the tyranny of the Nazis. They pushed back against the tyranny of the Soviet Union. They are now pushing back against the totalitarianism of Islamic terrorism. And what he is saying is, does the rest of Europe, does the United States have the will to survive and advance Judeo-Christian values? Or are we going to give that up and say, come one, come all, to the Islamic world? And the Islamic world, with the quote that you began at the beginning of the hour, says, we have no intention of assimilating into the Western Christian values or into America. In fact, we are in your face Islamic Sharia law. That's what she was saying. We are in your face with jihad. We are in your face in that we are going to conquer you, and our values will prevail, Islamic values, not your values. That's what we need to understand. They are literally at war against the West, and we have to recognize, as President Trump rightly asked, do we have the will to survive with our Western values?
You suggest that many Christians are naive as it concerns what we're talking about here. They don't understand the gravity of this situation, this invasion, if you want to call it. They don't, even pastors don't understand the gravity of this invasion.
That's right. And I am encouraging pastors to do a comparative study. Again, show where biblical values and biblical morality stands. In fact, look at the history of the West. Look at the history of America. A beautiful biblical story of what biblical values do to bring about positive change in a society. Then compare and contrast that with what Islam has brought about in Islamic countries. There are 56 Islamic countries in the world, 57 if you count the Palestinian Authority. We see dysfunction, poverty, misery, chaos, brutality against women, brutality against little children, little girls being forced into marriages. We see nonstop war. This is not a society or a culture that is bringing about a great deal of Pulitzer Prizes. And that's what we want. We want to see growth and joy and freedom where women can determine what it is they want to do with their own lives. Instead, here in Minneapolis, not too long ago, we saw a young Islamic fellow put together a posse of 10 other men, and they went up and down the streets in Minneapolis demanding that Islamic women conform to Sharia law and they want those who are non-Western also to conform to Sharia law in their Islamic zone. This is happening in Berlin. This is happening in Minneapolis. This is happening in various other cities in Britain where religious police are making those demands. And what that says is they don't fear the West anymore. Because that's how strong they are about their values prevailing over the West.
And it's coming to a neighborhood near you. Guarantee it. If you just joined me, you're listening to Understanding the Times Radio. I'm Jan Markell. I have in the studio with me for part 2 of a 2-part series, Michelle Bachman. I would like to play a quick soundbite. Her name is Ann Corcoran. She speaks very articulately about the topic that we're talking about for this segment.
It's been over 7 years since a church group from another state brought a couple hundred refugees to the rural county where I live. I wanted to know, how could they do this? What was the governmental process that allowed the resettlement of refugees to a county ill-prepared to assimilate them? Employment opportunities were scarce. The health department was not familiar with illnesses and mental health problems of people who came from parts of the third world. The school system was not prepared to teach large numbers of students who didn't speak English, and subsidized housing was scarce. I wanted to know who gave permission for what amounted to a dropping off of needy people in our county seat. So I began my research and posted everything I learned to a blog, Refugee Resettlement Watch, so that others might know what I learned about a federal program that is 35 years old this year. In summary, I discovered that the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees was choosing most of our refugees. It's under the influence of a powerful Muslim supremacist group called the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Not surprisingly, a large number of U.S.-bound refugees are coming from countries with large numbers of people who hate us, including Somalia, Afghanistan, Iraq, and soon from Syria, just to name a few. The U.S. State Department then distributes the refugees to 9 major federal contractors, 6 of which are so-called religious charities, but all are largely funded from the U.S. Treasury. They're not passing the plate on Sundays for the $1 billion price tag for the resettlement. And that figure does not include the extensive welfare benefits refugees receive. The refugees are then sent to over 190 cities and towns in the U.S., where the 9 major contractors support 350 subcontractors. The refugees receive help from the subcontractor for up to 6 months, and the subcontractor then submits paperwork to admit the relatives of the first group. As the years have passed, I've become increasingly alarmed by the percentage of problematic Muslim refugees admitted and distributed around the U.S. through this program. By the way, the Refugee Resettlement Program is not the only one used for legally admitting Muslims, but it is one of the most important. Many are forming cities within cities. Perhaps you know one where you live, where mosques are being built to consolidate, train, and promote a growing American Muslim population and its Islamic supremacist doctrine called Sharia. This process of Muslim colonization is called the Hijra. Muhammad told his followers to migrate and spread Islam in order to dominate all the lands of the world. He said they were obliged to do so, and that's exactly what they are doing now with the help and support of the UN, the U.S. State Department, and the Christian and Jewish groups assigned to seed them throughout the country. Your tax dollars pay for it all. I've written this little book, Refugee Resettlement and the Hijra to America, so that you will know what is happening to us and what we can do about it. We only need to look to a troubled Europe to see the path ahead for America if we can't stop this migration, and stop it soon. There's no reason on earth that we should have brought over 100,000 Somalis and another 100,000 Iraqi Muslims to America. Soon we will be resettling Syrian Muslims in large numbers. The UN at the moment has over 10,000 in a pipeline destined for our towns. The FBI told Congress recently that they cannot be properly screened. If you don't help counter the Hijra, we are, in my opinion, doomed. Over time, this migration will be more devastating to your children and grandchildren and to our country than any terrorist attack could ever be. Learn more at Refugee Resettlement Watch and SecureFreedom.org.
That was profound, Michelle. It was also rather terrifying. And she says, just look to a troubled Europe to see our path. We're going down the same path.
Europe is dying right now. In fact, there are experts who say that Christianity will be dead within a decade in Europe. Mm-hmm. Now, think about that. Mm-hmm. The cradle of Martin Luther 500 years ago with the Reformation, and we're looking at the death of Christianity. Well, then where do we go? If Christianity dies in the West, then where do we go? Yes, there's Christianity elsewhere, but this is the bulwark of Christianity, and this is an intentional effort, as Ann Corcoran said. I know Ann Corcoran. I've consulted with her. I've read her book, Refugee Resettlement. I highly recommend it. If you want to download it quickly from Kindle, you can do that as well. And she gives a very good background on what's going on with the refugee resettlement. The problems that come with people that come from dysfunctional nations with third world problems. What happens in the United States is that we shouldn't be shocked that all of a sudden we have third world problems here. For instance, in Minnesota, we've had to deal with a tremendous outbreak of measles. Yeah. It had been eradicated for 30 years in the state of Minnesota, and we've had 78 people so far have an outbreak of measles. We've had infectious tuberculosis, and this has come at a very high cost of millions of dollars in Minnesota. A new fund had to be created for public health because we ran out of money, and additional funds on top of that are being added. As Ann has stated, the people who are coming into our country aren't buying their own tickets to come in. This has nothing to do with immigration and the way that your forebears came into this country, where they had to sell whatever they had, get money together, get on a boat, and come over to America. And when they came here, they were glad to take any job that they could and then figure out how to make a better life. That isn't how it's done anymore. Now we pay welfare recipients to come into this country. We pay people to fly into America. When they come into America, we pay for interpreters. We pay for people to handle them and get them through the beginning process. We buy them a car. We give them a place to live. We pay for all of their health care. We pay for their energy that it costs for air conditioning, et cetera, in their home. We pay for all the shots for their kids. We teach them English. This is billions and billions of dollars that we spend on people who the very first segment of this show was opened with an individual who said, in your face Sharia, we will never assimilate to you. If you look at the history of Islam, going back to the 7th century, Islam doesn't assimilate. Islam conquers. That is what is happening in Europe, and that is what is happening in the United States of America. And that's why show after show after show could be done on the negative downstream effects of bringing people into this country who have no intention of swearing allegiance to the United States, because their allegiance remains to Islam. Islam is incompatible with the United States Constitution, and that's what doesn't make any sense to the American people. Why is it people would come into the United States if they don't want to become Americans and accept American values? But you see that over and over and over again, that parallel societies are springing up. Where Islam comes, it is a parallel closed society. They have no interest in becoming a part of America, generally speaking.